Our three guest speakers, Dr. Safiya Omari, Rukia Lumumba, and Charles Taylor, are the inheritors of Mississippi's vast community organizing tradition. The historical outline of these traditions include a long-standing cooperative ethos. In my own experiences as a researcher in Mississippi, I found that discussions of organizing, political economy, and racial justice often turn to childhood experiences of sharing resources, informal cooperative farming strategies, helping neighbors with the harvest, sharing vegetables from the garden or fruit from the orchard. I was attracted to Mississippi's social movement history because of its impressive record of accomplishments in developing group-centered leadership, community-centered educational models such as the Child Development Group in Mississippi, the first Head Start in Mississippi, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, the Mississippi Freedom Labor Union, and early examples of cooperatives such as the Poor People's Corporation, which was an initiative to help women form self-help projects, and also older forms. That one was from the late 60s. Older cooperatives like the Milestone Farm Cooperative, which boasted 106 small farm units, roughly a third of which were cooperatively farmed. And due to my conversations with Hollis Watkins, who's a legendary organizer in Mississippi, yes, who not only agreed to speak with me, but really took his time to teach me. And he was the one who directed me to speak to the farmers in Milestone and also encouraged me when I would come back with my interview responses. He encouraged me to go deeper. He really nudged me quite a bit, and I'm forever grateful for that. Now, as anthropologist James Scott reminds us, these examples provide just the shoreline, which is attractive and inspirational and instructive, but there is a vast ocean beyond it. Today, our speakers will provide a glimpse into that ocean of traditions as well as a vision for the future. Our speakers today are each contributing to a reimagining of what community-centered governance can look like. A critical moment in this reimagining occurred with the election of Chokwe Lumumba in 2014 to the office of mayor in the city of Jackson. Many of you are familiar with Chokwe Lumumba as an attorney and critical part of the provisional government of the Republic of New Africa. Under his leadership, participatory democracy was deployed to reshape municipal politics. In 2017, Antar Lumumba was elected and pledged to make Jackson, quote, the most radical city on the planet, unquote. This brings us to our speakers today. Our first speaker, Charles Taylor, is currently not here, and that is because he is currently working on the campaign of Mike Espy, who is running for Senate in Mississippi. Very important campaign. And those of you who have been following the campaign know that there is going to be a runoff. So Charles Taylor is on the ground working. So let me tell you a little bit about Charles Taylor, and then he is going to Skype in, right? All right, so Charles Taylor is a graduate of Morehouse College, where he majored in philosophy, a member of Freedom Side, a national collective of social justice community organizers. He served as a state organizer for the Mississippi Conference NAACP 2012. This is My Vote campaign, which registered 29,000 plus African Americans to vote in Mississippi. Taylor was a field director and campaign coordinator for the Better Schools, Better Jobs initiative. This is an initiative to fully fund education. Recently, he consults for One Voice, Inc. as a data manager and a community organizer for Energy Democracy. Taylor is the principal of Patent Strategies, a political data management firm. So It's very interesting to me. I've talked to a lot of my students about this. What is, as organizers, what is your relationship? I'm talking to you now, students. What is your relationship to electoral politics? And about 2 years ago, I asked the question and got these pain-tortured answers. So today, I'm very excited that Charles Taylor would be able to talk to you about that process of being an organizer, but also being creative and imaginative with respect to electoral politics and creating space for a more inclusive and participatory democracy. Our next speaker, I believe, would be Rukia Lumumba. I forgot the order. Rukia Lumumba is a legal professional, community organizer, and daughter of the late Mayor Chokwe Lumumba and Nubia Lumumba. Rukia Lumumba is founder of the People's Advocacy Institute, co-coordinator of the Electoral Justice Project, and campaign manager of the committee to elect Chokwe Antar Lumumba for mayor of Jackson. She spent the past 11 years defending the human rights of those inside prison cells, working with the community, advocates, and system stakeholders to alter the landscape of injustice in American courts and prisons. She's currently leading the Democratic Visioning Initiative in Jackson, Mississippi, to create a community governance model that increases community resources and governmental power. And our last speaker is Dr. Safiya Omari, currently serving as the Chief of Staff for Mayor Chokwe Antar Lumumba. She served as Associate Vice President for Research and Sponsored Programs and an Associate Professor of Social Work and Health Sciences at Jackson State University prior to accepting her current position in Mayor Lumumba's administration. Prior to her employment with Jackson State University, Dr. Omari served as chair of the psychology department at Eqbal College, very critical college, steeped in activism, a critical place of refuge and organizing during the movement. She received her PhD in experimental social psychology from Northeastern University, and her research interests include mental health, effects of gender, race, and culture on health behaviors and psychological well-being, violence against women, and discriminatory stress. Dr. Omari has published and presented nationally and internationally in these areas, and she's been honored on numerous occasions for excellence in scholarship and teaching, and for her work in the larger Jackson community. Dr. Omari has always identified herself as a scholar activist and continues to work with a number of community groups to address social justice and mental health issues. She also served as, I think I said this already, Chief of Staff for the City of Jackson for the late Mayor Chokwe Lumumba. She currently serves as an officer and member of several nonprofit boards. And Dr. Omari is a proud mother of 3 children and has 6 amazing grandchildren.
Good afternoon. First, I would say I really hate that I can't be there in person, but hopefully you forgive me. There's some exciting stuff happening on the ground here in Mississippi. Also, even virtually, it is an honor and a privilege to share the stage with Dr. Safiya Omari and Rukia Lumumba. The things I would like to impress upon you as it relates to Mississippi, its political history, as well as its history of community organizing, is that the thing that I've been thinking about the most is that elections have consequences. The reality of it is that many people may feel that electoral politics is something that's not sexy to them, or something that they don't believe in, or something that's very corrupt. And there is some parts in it, but the fact is that it has consequences. And the reason why it has consequences is because elections are literally about power. And when I say power, sometimes people do not like that word. I think it's a word that we should embrace, and here's why. I define power very simply as the ability to make a decision. And so the question becomes now, who are able to make the decisions for themselves versus who have decisions made for them. And so with this election that's happened in Mississippi as it relates to Secretary Mike Espy, who was the former Secretary of Agriculture under Bill Clinton, and the first U.S. Senator, African-American U.S. Senator in Mississippi since Reconstruction, has decided to run for U.S. Senate. And so he is going into a runoff with Cindy Hyde-Smith, who's an appointed incumbent Republican senator from Mississippi. And since Tuesday, there's been a lot of excitement, there's been a lot of momentum, but there's also, for me, been some reflecting points. And so I just feel honored that I can speak to you now about Mississippi. And so opening it up that way, I really wanted to think about the Mississippi theater of the civil rights movement. I love Mississippi. I'm a proud Mississippian. I'm happy to be from Mississippi. And the reason is because we have such a strong and beautiful history of community organizing. And so just to go back a few years, because we could talk about Mississippi and its organizing traditions for a very long time, but I know we don't have that time. I wanted to start right after 1963, after they found when they were in search for the 3 slain civil rights workers. And so, many of you may have known what happened in 63 with the 3 civil rights workers in Neshoba County and how they were, literally brutally murdered. And in the pursuit of their bodies, in the search of those bodies, they found somewhere between a dozen to 3 dozen African Americans, particularly African American men, by literally draining lakes and rivers, or searching in the rivers, draining some of the lakes, looking through the woods. And these were people who, as some were hung, some were murdered other ways. And with that, you had a group of young people who decided to come together and said, this is not right. How can we do something to change not just the course of Mississippi, but the course of this country? And so if you fast forward to 1963, during the Freedom Summer, you had young people. When I say young, some young as 16, 15, and some maybe as old as 26, 27, who came together and they decided they needed to do something about what is happening. They needed to do something about the brutality that many African Americans and people of color were facing in the state at that time. And so they decided to come up with this concept of Freedom Summer, which is going to be a summer of organizing, where after long deliberations, and Hollis Watkins, who was mentioned, was one of the first members of SNCC in Mississippi. He's a Freedom Summer veteran. So, some of the remarks I'm giving are conversations that I can recall having with him and many others. But, after a lot of deliberation, they decided that they wanted to, bring individuals down from all over the country, some who may have come from places like Amherst, who, may have not looked like them. And one of the objectives was to try to see how many African Americans they could get registered to vote. And so as they were going down and they were looking at this process, there was a lot of national press. So, people were very interested to say, what's happening in Mississippi? We have these young people coming down. They're literally trying to register African Americans to vote, some Black, some white. And so the cameras followed them. And as the cameras followed them, captured in their frame was all of the brutality that was happening and all of the resistance that there was in order to get, just for people to be able to first have the right to vote and then ultimately want to exercise their right. And so one of the arguments that the Dixiecrats at that time, which, I guess is a precursor to some of the uglier forms of what we would call the Republican Party now. The suggestion was that African Americans in Mississippi did not have the will to vote. And so they end up creating the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. You may know Fannie Lou Hamer being a part of. And when they created that party, they decided to have a mock election. And then with that mock election, over 100,000 African Americans in the state of Mississippi participated in a mock election. So it was a beautiful thing. But out of that, they also attempted to unseat the Democratic Party of Mississippi. To give a bit of a context at that time, Mississippi was a one-party state. There was only the Democratic Party. And if you were anything but white, you could not participate in the electoral process. And so the argument was that the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party should be the party to represent Mississippi. It was inclusive. It was a party that people could actually participate in, no matter their race, gender, religion, etc. And so they went up to the Democratic National Convention of 1964 in Atlantic Station. And some of you may know this moment as when Fannie Lou Hamer gave her famous testimony. So no, I was just giving some remarks about the exchange that Fannie Lou Hamer had with Adam Clayton Powell. Like I said, he was a representative from New York. And so Adam Clayton Powell was trying to convince Fannie Lou Hamer and the Mississippi Democratic Party to take the compromise, not the entire slate for delegation. And when she was having this exchange, she says to Adam Clayton Powell, "Mr. Adam Clayton Powell, how many barrels of cotton have you picked?" And what she meant by that is that unless you were from Mississippi, unless you endured the struggle of Mississippians, particularly Black Mississippians, you could not talk to me about compromise. I wanted to start there because I wanted to really give context to machines in Mississippi, the Black political power in Mississippi, how it relates and how, what is in the DNA. I believe in the DNA of the Black political machine in Mississippi, Fannie Lou Hamer, and that sentiment is that if you are not from here, you cannot understand our struggles. And also that it has to be deeply rooted in community, particularly in the vehicle that we use in order to advance our politics has to involve community organizing. And so as I think to Lumumba Sr., the former mayor of Jackson, the late Chokwe Lumumba, and all of the things that he did while he was in Jackson prior to being an elected official, it really set the scene for when he decided to run for office as a councilman. I grew up knowing Chokwe Lumumba Sr. from afar, someone that I admired, that I didn't have a close relationship with, but he was one of those individuals that would literally give to people in a way that his right hand wouldn't know what his left hand was doing. And so I say that to say is that he was very successful while he was in Mississippi. Why I believe that is because he recognized that Mississippi had more to offer him than he had to offer it. He later became the mayor for a very long time. But you fast forward to Chokwe Antar Lumumba winning in 2017, and people in the city of Jackson are excited. He is, he literally, some of the same individuals who helped him get elected, people who were, the architects at a party like Hollis Watkins, the state, and individuals in the city of Jackson, and really individuals all over the country came out to support him. And Jacksonians responded to that. No, that this was the man that we wanted to be our mayor. The reason why Marx talked that in the DNA of the political, I'm getting feedback. Hello? Yeah, sorry about that. but deeply connected to our political DNA is that history of community organizing. And so the last thing I would say is that as we look to the future of Mississippi, all of this happens in a continuum. Mississippi has more Black elected officials than any other state in the country. This is not by happenstance. This is not because we have a number of African Americans, but this is because of folks like Hollis Watkins, Henry Kirkus, Percy, Carol Rose, and others who looked at the issues of redistricting, making sure that not only did we have the right to vote, but we had districts where we could actually elect people who look like us. And those boundary lines represent the people. So sorry about that. I'm gonna try to wrap up this way and just say that the election that's happening right now is really exciting. We had a record highs in our midterm election. About over 200,000 more Mississippians turned out for this election than the last midterm election.
I am so honored to have been asked to participate in this celebration of Eqbal Ahmad's legacy. The more I learn about him, the more I feel like the people that I've walked with in this struggle, that we're all kindred spirits. He reminds me, the stories that I've heard about him reminds me of the senior Chokwe Lumumba. And I have to give him credit, along with some other young revolutionaries, for me being here today. I know he's responsible for me being in Jackson, Mississippi. This first slide, and there's so much that has happened, I'm kind of not gonna follow my notes, just gonna go with what my heart tells me. Okay, but this first slide says, building a dignity economy. Is this movement work? And that was one of the questions that was often posed to me about the work we were doing in electoral politics in Jackson, Mississippi. I'm going to give you this quote from the late Mayor Lumumba that everyone talks about. During his campaign for mayor, he made the statement, if you don't love the people, you will eventually betray the people. He wanted to make sure that everyone knew that his political ambitions had nothing to do with being a politician. That he was running for mayor because he loved the people of Jackson. He was frustrated with how little he could do to change the circumstances of their life from his position as a councilman. So he said, well, okay, if the mayor has all the power to do this, then that's going to be me. Now, he did this in an environment where he was often cast as this angry Black man who was so full of hate that you just couldn't trust him. You needed to be afraid of him. So when he announced he was running for mayor, there were a lot of people who said, oh, he doesn't stand a snowball's chance in H-E-L-L. That's the grandmother in me, that it makes me spell. But I put to you that building this dignity economy is very much movement work. It's very important movement work. And why is it so important? Because you can touch people where they live. You can understand the needs of people, and you can respond. And what Charles said to me about power, that ability about to make your own decision, poor people don't have that. They don't have the resources. Their lives are controlled by other people. What they eat, where they shop, how they get around. All of these things are controlled by the people who have what? The money and the power. So when we talk about building a dignity economy in Jackson, we're talking about the idea that no community is disposable and no human being is disposable. So government must attend to the needs of each and every one of its citizens. Now that might sound a little bit utopian, but the bottom line is when you give people power, well, I don't even want to put it like that. When you inspire people to utilize their power, government will respond. It has to respond. And that's what this administration is about. It's about inspiring people to utilize their power. We talk about it as self-determination. Now, you heard in my bio, I was a chair of a psychology department, and then I moved to be an associate professor of social work. And it's funny, social work, the program needed somebody to teach statistics and research. And somebody approached me, and I said, oh, yeah, I can do that, you know. But then I wasn't too excited about it, right? Because I was excited about psychology, but I went to their code of ethics. And in their code of ethics, it had, you have to respect the self-determination of each individual that you serve. So coming from the movement and hearing that term in the code of ethics, I got inspired. And I said, okay, that's where I want to be. That's where I want to go. And then I also realized that I felt much more comfortable organizing in the streets than directing rats in a lab. So I want to give you a little bit more context. Charles went way back to Fannie Lou Hamer and the Democratic Freedom Party and a very, very important movement. And both the senior Chokwe Lumumba and Chokwe Antar Lumumba ran as members of the Freedom Democratic Party. Now people say, does it still exist? Well, but they have cards, right? And so we had the card, and that's what we showed for our party. All right. Jackson, Mississippi, 1971. The RDNA 11. How many of you have even heard of the RDNA 11? How many of you have heard of the Republic of New Africa? Okay, great, great. Well, in Jackson, Mississippi in 1971, in August of 1971, I was preparing to go to Louisiana Tech University as a freshman in Shreveport, Louisiana, which is about 2 hours, 3 hours up the highway from Jackson, Mississippi, right? And I was all excited because I understood that I was going to be a part of the largest class of African-American students to ever enter Louisiana Tech University, and I was gonna be there and be seen and be heard. So whopping 180 of us out of a campus of 10,000 students. So we kind of got swallowed up in everything, but we made a dent there. So while I'm doing this, the RDNA 11 was being attacked by the FBI and the City of Jackson Police Department. They were revolutionaries who decided that they wanted some land and some independence so that they could control their own lives. They were tired of fighting against racial discrimination and the racial violence that was prevalent, highlighted in the South, but it was all over the country, really. So they bought some land in Bolton, Mississippi, where our Representative Benny Thompson is from, the only African American representing the state of Mississippi on the federal level. And they decided they were going to have a land celebration day. That put them, well, they were already on the radar, because when you talked about blacks being self-determining, that was frightening, right? But it brought even more attention to them, because they said they were going to defend themselves. So on this August morning, they were awakened by this, I guess you would call them a task force now, that gave them a minute to come outside. Now, they're all in the house asleep. They gave them a minute to come outside, and after 75 seconds had passed, they shot a tear gas canister into this house that was occupied by men, women, and children, and only 7 or 8 RDNA members. They didn't expect what they got in return. After they shot in the tear gas, they began to fire on the house, and the RDNA 11 defended themselves. It all ended up with one Jackson police officer dead and another officer wounded and an FBI agent wounded. They were arrested. This is how they were paraded through the streets of Jackson, Mississippi in 1971. In chains, as if they were animals, for doing what every human being has a right to do: defend themselves when attacked. That's a picture of the house that was shot up in 1971, and it still exists today. Fast forward. Chokwe Lumumba was about 24 years old when all of that happened. He just so happened not to be in Mississippi at the time that the house was shot up. He was determined, though, that he was going to come back to Mississippi and organize and defend the members of the RDNA 11. That incident was really what started him on his pursuit of his law degree. And if you know anything about him, you know that he defended everybody who asked him pretty much whether they could pay or not. When he moved to Mississippi, there's a tidbit, he was a barterer, right? So if people couldn't pay him for legal services, he would take whatever they could give him. So I can remember the first big screen TV I ever saw. One of his clients gave it to him for legal fees, but it didn't work. And I can remember his wife, Nubia, saying to me about the move to Mississippi, she says, I just hope he don't trade farm animals for legal service, because I'm not living in the country. I'm buying me a house in the city. But that's who he was. So and that's the reputation that followed him as he ran for mayor. But Chokwe understood that when you meet people and you appreciate who they are, you listen to their struggles, you know you can't solve everybody's problems, but sometimes people just want somebody to listen empathetically to what they're going through. He knew that in spite of all of those who laughed when he said he was going to run for councilman and then laughed even harder when he said he was going to run for mayor, he knew that he had touched the hearts and the minds of the people of Jackson. He understood that. He had 20 plus odd years of organizing on the ground. In 1990, he and I organized the largest anti-Klan demonstration that Mississippi had ever seen. It was that kind, and the biggest thing about him, though, was he was honest. He laid it out for you. You know, if it looked good, he told you it looked good. If it looked bad, he said, yeah, it looked bad, but I'm gonna do everything I can to help you. That's who he was. And that's what people were looking for. They were looking for honesty. They were looking for a person who was real. And they were looking for a person who cared about them as human beings. So we became members of this organization, the Jackson Human Rights Coalition, when we first moved to Jackson. He moved in '88, I moved in '89. And in this Jackson Human Rights Coalition, you know, everybody wondered, well, why y'all call yourself Jackson Human Rights instead of Jackson Civil Rights, right? And the idea was that human rights are yours, period. Nobody can ever take that away from you. Civil rights were legislated in, and they can be legislated out. So what we were teaching people is that what you need to understand is that you have to fight for your recognition as a full human being with the rights of every full human being on this planet. And once you understand that, you won't tolerate what society is throwing at you. You won't tolerate being considered less than, because you will know who you are and what you deserve as a human being. You will understand that you have the right to self-defense. You will understand that you have the right to be angry. It's how you utilize that anger that matters most. And one of the first things people want to tell us as oppressed folk is that we can't come at folk angry because nobody's going to listen to us. And I say just the opposite. We have to embrace it all. But what we also have to do is turn that anger into organized action for change. We just can't sit around being mad. So we understood that revolution is protracted, right? Most revolutions start with a handful of people, and over years it builds and builds and builds until you have a mass movement that brings about the change that we want to see. But as revolutionaries, too often we're way out ahead of the people, right? We're talking about theories that they don't care about because their stomach is rumbling. So what we have to understand is we meet people where they are. And that's where the organizing work begins. And I'm going to quote Chokwe again. If you can't organize anybody but people who think like you, then you're not much of an organizer. So this man laid the foundation. We talked about electoral politics. We went back and forth. And I'll admit, he had to kind of drag me in with him because I've been disappointed too many times by elected officials. Charles talked about Mississippi having the most elected officials in the state legislature than any other state in the union. And Mississippi is still dead last on everything good and dead first on everything bad. So just electing them isn't enough. What we have to understand, and this is a quote from the young Chokwe, so I was bossed by the dad, now I'm bossed by the son, I'm also bossed by the daughter, but hey, I love it, I'm blessed. So Mayor Chokwe Antar Lumumba, 36? 35 years old, often says to people, we can no longer afford to elect people who just look like us. We have to elect people who think like us. We have to elect people with a vision. We have to elect people who love the people. And once we elect them, we have to hold them accountable. That's what Jackson, Mississippi is all about. We're in office, but you have to hold us accountable. And I have to say at least once a week to folk, this is not the revolution, right? This is just about us trying to show people what good government should be about. That's what we're doing. And we're doing it by going back to this dignity economy. An economy that focuses on the value of human beings, not on the profit margin that a company can make. Not bringing in these huge companies and giving them tax incentives that you can't afford because you're the poorest state in the union. And then watching them pick up 25 years later, leave thousands of people unemployed, leave communities devastated because they're going off looking for a larger profit. We want a human scale economy where people work together to build what they need and what they want to see in their communities. Because if you are invested in your community, you're not going to jump up and leave 25 years later. So that's where the whole idea and the whole notion of cooperative economics comes from. But don't get me wrong. We want business to come to Jackson. We want businesses to invest in Jackson, but they also have to understand that we value our constituents and we don't want them exploited. We know that many of them struggle to pay the taxes that we receive to run city government, and we want to make sure that those taxes are put to the best use for our constituents. So that's what the dignity economy is about. Seeing this in action helps me to really understand the value of electoral politics. But I say to you, that can't be the only way. We still need the grassroots organizing in the streets. Otherwise, elected officials will lack the accountability. Our system, this system, well, I have to go back to another quote. America didn't go wrong because America has never been right. The fact of the matter is the Constitution is a beautiful document. But I was 3/5 of a person. I wasn't a full human being. Women were not recognized as citizens within the Constitution. So we have to understand that even though it's a beautiful document, we are still aspiring to reach its full potential. And to make that happen, it's going to take each and every one of us organizing and freeing the land. Now that phrase came from Bolton, Mississippi in it was after 1971, I think it was 1972, when we had the land celebration. But that phrase came after they bought that land and against the will of the state government, went down and had a land celebration day. And someone shouted, "Free the land." So free the land, because the land is the source of the wealth that all of us need to survive. Shouldn't be owned by huge corporations. Should be owned by who? The people. So I'm going to sit down. I think I went way past my 15 minutes. But free the land.
Free the land. Free the land. Free the land. By any means necessary. I offer you greetings. I come with love. I am so thankful to be here. My name is Rukia Lumumba. I am the daughter of Chokwe Lumumba and Nubia Lumumba. I am the goddaughter, taught and challenged by Mama Safiya Omari, and by so many, Iyafalolu Omobola, who's going to present tomorrow, and so many more, right? And I say that because it's important to recognize our elders, where we come from, and our ancestors, right? So I just give thanks and praise for that. You know, we were talking about, you heard Charles talk about Fannie Lou Hamer, right? Well, I am coming from a space where I've kind of been up for the past 2 days, right? Because we just had some serious elections. And as a member of the Electoral Justice Project of the Movement for Black Lives, where we co-directed some amazing wins in 22 cities across this here United States, right? You know, we're a little tired, because we're also still fighting to ensure that we have some wins in Georgia and in Florida, right? And that we're going to win also right again in Mississippi with Mike Espy. And so, you know, when Charles was talking about Fannie Lou Hamer today, Stacey Abrams came across my mind. Because on the Tuesday night, right, at 12 a.m., when I decided, I better go to bed because I got to get back to Jackson to then get to New Hampshire, right? Right? When when I went to bed that night, me and my girlfriends were really upset, hurt, mad, angry. I mean, angry, right? That she supposedly was losing, right? But when we woke up in the morning, when we got up that morning, and the first thing that popped across my phone was that I do not concede, right? Then I thought about Fannie Lou Hamer, right? I do not concede, right? She spoke up for all of us on Wednesday morning, right? Or late Tuesday night. This is another Mississippi woman, right? So if you didn't know about Stacey Abrams, she was raised in Mississippi, right? So she comes from good seeds, right? We know that for a fact, right? When I went to vote on Tuesday morning in Mississippi before I went to Atlanta to help with her campaign, what happened was I'm sitting in there trying to, go ahead and put my ballot through after they tell me that I'm not on the roster, right? Me, I'm not on the roster, right? Now, we done had my brother elected, had all these other people, but I'm not on the roster. But anyway, as they're working that out, the brother behind me is talking about Abrams and how he went to school with her, right? So, I mean, it's all full circle, and I'm just saying that, Fannie Lou Hamer's legacy, her strength, is speaking through all of us right now, right? As is Stokely Carmichael, as is Mario Bedelli, who was one of those RDNA 11, right, that was walking barefoot, because you couldn't see that from your vantage point. But they had them in chains walking barefoot down the streets of Mississippi with no shirts on, in chains, looking like they were encaptured Africans, looking like they were slaves, right? And so let's be clear, that was in 1971, and a lot of that is still happening. When you have Willie Jones Jr., a young 21-year-old black man dating a white woman in Forest, Mississippi, in 2018, is found hung outside of his girlfriend's house, the front yard. And the coroner comes, the sheriff comes, and they rule it a suicide after doing what they call a visual autopsy. A visual autopsy is me looking at you and says, oh yeah, you look like you committed suicide. When you have that happen, you know that you have to take action in your own hands. The sheriff has got to go. The coroner has got to go. One way that we make that happen is through our electoral politics work, right? When you have a woman, Eleanor Bumper, 66 years old, who is sitting in her home, minding her own business, and police bust into her home and shoot her down to the ground, dead, because they went to the wrong house, the police chief has got to go, right? When you have Laquan McDaniels in Chicago shot in his back while running, and the prosecutor, the mayor, and the police chief refuse to prosecute it and try to cover it up, the whole system has got to go, right? And so that's what we're really trying to do. We recognize that electoral work, electoral politics, is much more than just electing the right people. What we're doing in Jackson, Mississippi, is that we're shifting this model of governance, one that allows for one person to make all the decisions for many. And we're actually saying that that type of governance is no longer appropriate and never actually probably was, right? And so what we're saying is that governance has to come from the minds, the hearts, the will, and the decision-making power and agency of the people that actually sit there on that land, right? It doesn't matter your age. It doesn't matter your status, immigrant or non-immigrant, citizen or not. Doesn't matter your class, your race. It matters that you exist there and that you care about that space, right? And so what we're doing in Jackson, and I control it, sorry. I was about to say, you can go to the next slide, sorry. What we're doing in Jackson is we're moving from what we considered from being governed, right, to governing, right? So a people a people of Jackson, Mississippi, a government that we consider for the people, by the people. When my brother first ran as mayor, or when he ran mayor this time, his slogan that we adopted from Ras Baraka out in New Jersey, I have to admit that, we took that slogan. He said, "When I become mayor, you become mayor." And that just wasn't a saying. We were genuinely speaking about the process of creating a co-governance model, a community-led co-governance model, where residents had the power and agency to actually make decisions with government. And so instead of just being the afterthought, instead of being considered once the policy has already been created, we said that we have to create a space and a place to ensure that people consistently have the right to make the decisions that best impact them. It's that age-old saying, the people closest to the pain are closest to the solution, and we realize that. And that idea first came to us, it came to my father and comrades like Mama Safiya back in about 2005, for real, is when it really started to hit us that we had to really stop saying that we had the answers as advocates and began to realize that the answers come from you, right? From the people most impacted. So one example of this is that during one of our people's assemblies right after Katrina, as we were developing the People's Platform, right, that was going to lead my father's campaign for city council person. My father asked the people, what's the biggest issue? What's most impacting you? And everybody said potholes. And he thought they were going to say something radical, like racism or economic injustice, or it was, they said potholes. Well, see, the reality is that they were right on, right? Of course they're going to be right on. They're the people, right? So they were right on because, see, those potholes were significant and indicative of a bigger problem. Because every time somebody's car ran over a pothole, the tire burst, which means now you need a new tire. And the potholes in Jackson are so big that now you need a new rim because it cracks your rim too, right? And when that happens, you're late for work. So now the money that you were going to pay for rent has to go to fix this tire or this rim, and you can't pay your rent. So now you're in an economic hardship, right? Then you can't buy your kids what they want or need on a holiday. So now you're mad, right? And you take that out on folks, right? It is literally, and I'm not exaggerating this, I want you to really think about it. This is real. It is literally becomes not only an economic hardship, it becomes a significant emotional hardship on the entire family, right? And so that's what we're talking about when we have to stop thinking we know all the answers, and we have to begin to engage in processes that allow the people, the masses of our people, those most impacted, those most marginalized, those most left out of the decision-making power to make decisions, to help develop solutions. And so we call that what we term community-led co-governance. It is the actualization of transformative change by building community agency within our most vulnerable communities, by constructing pathways for constituents, particularly individuals and families directly impacted by the devastating effects of failing government, healthcare, mass incarceration, and you name it, right? Put simply, it is at its core a process that enables a deep democratic participation of the people in their own governance, shifting the tide from being governed to governing. This image you see here is at one of our people's assemblies that was held in November of 2017. So this idea of co-governance, right? This idea of co-governance is not new to Mississippi. It's not new to black folks. It's not new to folks of color across the world. It's not new to many of you all in here, right? In this, you hear United States, for black people, it was practiced by enslaved Africans over and over and over again. And that's what that first image is, right? To organize to determine how do we move forward, how do we collectively unify and figure out a way to deal with the current situation that we were in, right? It was also a place where they practiced spirituality and used that to move forward and engage in ways of survival, because that's what they were trying to do. It was also practiced by Fannie Lou Hamer and the Freedom Democratic Party and SNCC and a number of other organizations back in the 60s. And then it was rebirthed in the 1990s to some extent by Mama Safiya and my father, Chokwe Lumumba, right there, right? And many comrades who came and assisted in that process. And now it is being used in Jackson, Mississippi as an actual supported process, right, by the Lumumba administration. My brother said when he became mayor that we all became mayor. And so assemblies now are used as vehicles to actually begin to put forth this idea of community-led governance. The assembly process is not a part of government. It is an autonomous space that allows community members to engage in decision-making and solution process development. So we'll talk about that a little more tomorrow. I'm not going to go too deep, right? But it is an important mechanism for us to use. I have a couple, I don't know how much time I have, and I don't want to go over, but one of the things I had was a little short clip to show you of the assembly process. I don't know how you do this. Sorry. Nope. So maybe I won't show that video, and it's okay, because I don't want to hold us too much longer either. But anyway, maybe you'll see it tomorrow. If you come to the session, it'll be lots of fun. Here are some pictures that I put in here just in case the video didn't work. So these are a couple examples of what the room might look like, right? How we engage in it. At the core, though, of our people's assemblies are several values that we hold significant. So one, and this is at the core of what we call community-led governance, right? So one is that communities, especially the most marginalized, need to demand the right, responsibility, and resources for ensuring the safety and well-being of its residents. Two, people of color, Black people, women, trans and queer people, low-income people, working, poor, formerly incarcerated persons, and young people are assets to be supported and should have a central voice in developing and designing programs and policies that directly affect them. And three, the disproportionate incarceration of Black, Indigenous, and brown people, in addition to the flow of dollars away from communities of color, is a systemic injustice that must be corrected. Those are our core values. So, how will we achieve this? We'll achieve it in three ways. One, developing infrastructure for participation. So when I talk about the assembly process, it's not just an event like we're here in this room. No, it's much more than that. The process is long, right? So the process includes more than just us gathering in one space. But the infrastructure includes neighbor-to-neighbor conversations, facilitating that process. It includes one-on-one conversations. It includes surveying. It includes data collection. It includes research. It includes learning exchanges with other cities and other nations. It includes a lot of work. It includes basically campaigning for the rest of your life, right? You know, as a process where engaging in electoral politics no longer becomes something that you do every 2 years or every 4 years, but begins to be something that you do as if you brush your teeth every morning, right? That's what we're hoping for, that our people are beginning to lead government and not the reverse, right? It also is about, and we also plan to do this by increasing access to information. So that means making sure that folks know what's happening in City Hall, right? People ain't gonna necessarily come to a city council meeting. And so we wanna bring the city council meeting to them, right? Yeah, it's live streamed, but most of the time folks don't even know when it happens. So we've created a website that allows folks to interact with what's going on in the city, right? And to also leave videos and suggestions around what they feel are the solutions that we need to common problems, right? We also believe we're going to achieve this by building capacity and power. I think that that's probably the most important part of this process, for me at least. Because a lot of times our folks don't recognize or realize their agency, right? You know, what's happening right now is in Georgia and in Florida is an exercise of people governing, right? When we take to the streets, we are governing, right? When we protest, we are governing. But we can't just stop there. We have to push harder. And so building that capacity and that power, one of the ways we hope to do that in Mississippi, in Jackson, is one, to spread assemblies throughout the state and further on throughout the nation. But also, it's to institutionalize the assembly process as something that government has to respect and rely on, right, as an autonomous structure. So at the heart of all of this, we feel that assemblies are important, that this co-governance model is important, because my father once told us, and not because he told us, but I think he just really laid it out for us in the clearest way possible. He says, the People's Assembly is the heart and soul of what we do here in Jackson. The Assembly is a vehicle for political education and a vehicle to make the people more prepared to be motivated and organized, to create social change in Jackson. The people must decide. We have to educate, motivate, and organize. That's what he says, that's what we believe, and that's what we are here to put to you that we are trying to do in Jackson, Mississippi. And we are very optimistic, right? So I was hopeful that I could have this video play called Optimistic. It's a music video by the Robert Glasper Project, where they highlight Jackson, Mississippi, with Common rapping and Brandy singing. It's really great. Remake of Sounds of Blackness, Optimistic, which was my mother's favorite. It's all kind of weird that it happened. So beautiful, though. But if you have time on your, and you know, please check it out. It definitely leaves you feeling hopeful, and it definitely shows you some of the challenges that we have to overcome in Jackson, and also lets you know that we have a lot of great minds, and our collective wisdom is going to help us get to the right solutions so that we can be a model for the world. So thank you. If you want to know more about the work that we're doing on building this co-governance model, feel free to visit us at jacksonpeoplesassembly.org. That's JXNpeoplesassembly.org. I have so much thanks and appreciation for being invited here, learning about Eqbal Ahmad and the amazing legacy of work that he provided to this world is inspiring. And I am thankful for this opportunity and thankful to share it with two of my mentors, Mama Safiya Omari and Iya Ifalola Omabola, and one of my great colleagues, Charles Taylor. So thank you, appreciate y'all, and have an amazing night. Good night.